That medal probably was bought online, and flashing it around like that, trying to look important. Economy class is more appropriate for your type. That's what the airline supervisor said, with quiet disdain toward the Royal Guard, before publicly downgrading him from first class. But what she didn't realize was that her little power trip would soon bring her face to face with the king himself. So, how did a humble Royal Guard's quiet dignity catch the attention of royalty? Before we answer that, press the subscribe button and drop a comment below telling us where in the world you're watching from. Now, without further ado, let's get into it. The polished floor of Terminal 5 gleamed under the white Heathrow lighting as Color Sergeant Reuben Shaw stepped through the automatic doors. It was just past 9 in the morning, and the crowd was already pulsing with the energy of missed alarms and looming departures, but Reuben moved with a steadiness that had nothing to do with the rush around him. His ceremonial boots landed with purpose. His scarlet tunic, pressed to a razor's edge, bore the insignia of a man who had spent 30 years in disciplined service. Pinned just above his breast pocket was a Victoria Cross. The medal was aged, slightly dulled by time. Not ostentatious. Just quietly there. The way most men who'd earned one preferred it. He drew quiet glances as he moved through the terminal, not because of the medal, but because of the uniform. Some travelers stared openly. A few lowered their phones respectfully, and others simply gave him a wide berth, unsure whether they were in the presence of royalty or a reenactment. Reuben didn't react. He had been assigned ceremonial duty since the late 90s, rotating between Windsor and Buckingham, interspersed with overseas deployments that weren't spoken about over coffee. The years had layered him with a calm no amount of attention could fracture. He approached the check-in counter. The woman behind the desk smiled politely until her eyes caught the glint of bronze on his tunic. Her gaze lingered a second too long. "Good morning, sir," she said, more hesitant now. "Do you have a reservation number?" "Yes," Reuben replied, offering a printed confirmation and his military ID. "Queen's Guard, traveling on protocol orders to Edinburgh, first-class British Airways Flight 206. The agent looked at the ID, then at him, then again at the Victoria Cross. A subtle pause. "Just a moment," she said, glancing toward the back office. It wasn't unusual for staff to confirm military travel. What was unusual was the way she kept looking at the medal as if unsure whether it was real. Within 30 seconds, a senior woman approached, a short, pinched expression. Early 50s. Her name tag read, Elaine Marks, Terminal Supervisor. She didn't smile. "Sir," she said flatly, "may I ask the purpose of your travel in full uniform?" "I was instructed to arrive in ceremonial dress. Memorial parade. At the Palace of Holyrood House this evening." She nodded once, eyes still locked on the medal. "That decoration. Where did you obtain it?" Reuben paused. "It was awarded for actions in Helmand Province, July 2007. Elaine didn't blink. "Do you have paperwork confirming that?" "My ID should suffice." "That medal isn't issued lightly." Elaine exchanged a look with the desk agent, then reached out and gently tapped her pen on the medal. "Passengers have been known to wear unauthorized insignia, especially the decorative ones. They can cause confusion or distress on board." Reuben held her gaze. "With respect, ma'am, this isn't decorative." She pressed her lips together and nodded to the desk agent. "Proceed with document verification. I'll be making a few calls." As she walked off, she muttered under her breath, but just loud enough. "Some people really will do anything to look important." Reuben said nothing, just stood taller. Not for her, for the ones who couldn't anymore. Elaine Marks returned 10 minutes later with a colleague, in tow, an off-duty airline employee named Brendan, still in a Navy fleece-marked Operation Support. He looked uncomfortable the moment he saw Ruben's uniform. "He's wearing a Victoria Cross," Elaine whispered to him, not even attempting subtlety. "It looks real, but it's hard to tell these days. Some of them are replicas. Could have bought it online." Brendan frowned. "Shouldn't we just verify it?" she snapped under her breath. "I don't want drama in the boarding lounge." Ruben, who hadn't moved an inch, spoke with quiet clarity. "You're welcome to verify it with the Ministry of Defense or the Royal Household. Either would be happy to confirm." Elaine didn't answer. She walked back to the counter and gestured for Ruben to step aside. "We'll continue check-in once we sort this out," she said flatly. Ruben stepped aside without protest, setting down his leather carry case and folding his gloved hands in front of him. The uniform was heavy, but not half as heavy as what was being suggested. A few minutes later, another junior employee returned with his boarding pass in hand, but not the one he'd been issued earlier. "Sir?" she said gently, eyes flicking up to his chest and back down. "You've been reassigned. Seat 37B economy." Ruben blinked once. "On what grounds?" The girl flinched slightly. We were told there was a concern about onboard disturbance. The supervisor said your uniform and metal could cause confusion in the cabin." "Confusion?" Ruben repeated, quietly. She nodded helplessly. "I'm so sorry, sir. It's above me." He looked down at the boarding pass. "Middle seat?" "I'm afraid so." Ruben didn't argue, just nodded and took the slip. He'd been in tighter spaces, worse seats. He remembered a flatbed truck in Kandahar with 23 men and a goat, all crammed under a flapping tarpaulin in 50 degrees heat. This wasn't hardship. This was protocol failure. Elaine reappeared a moment later, eyeing the exchange. "That metal really necessary?" she asked sharply. "We've had passengers complain in the past. Think it's intimidating? Suggests violence?" Ruben's reply came measured but firm. "That's not a decoration, ma'am. That's a name." Elaine tilted her head. "A name for the ones who didn't come home. We don't wear it for show. We wear it for them." She crossed her arms. "Well, this is a commercial airline, not the Senate. If you want to play dress up, do it somewhere else." Several nearby passengers turned at the remark. Ruben didn't flinch. "I'm under royal orders. I was instructed to report in uniform for the ceremony in Edinburgh." "Well, then, I suggest you get used to economy," she said coldly. "We're not running a parade here." Ruben gave her a slow nod. "No, I don't suppose you are." Elaine turned to walk off, clearly satisfied she'd won something. Brendan hesitated, glancing back at Ruben with something like regret before following her. As Ruben gathered his things, a man in a business suit stepped out of the nearby queue. "Excuse me," he said, voice low. "I saw that, and I just want to say thank you for your service." Ruben gave him a single nod. "It's appreciated." The businessman looked down at the medal. "That's the VC, isn't it?" "It is. I've never seen one up close. Most people haven't." He held out his hand. Ruben shook it once firmly, then turned and headed for Gate 12C without fanfare, without protest. Only the weight of silence trailing him. Gate 12C was already boarding by the time Color Sergeant Reuben Shaw arrived. His steps steady, but unhurried. The polished black boots that had marched across palace courtyards and combat outposts alike made no extra sound on the linoleum. Passengers already seated glanced up from their devices as he stepped through the jet bridge, bearskin cap tucked under one arm, ceremonial tunic still sharp despite the delay. The gold trim glinted faintly beneath the overhead lights, less like a display, more like a held standard. He reached row 37, middle seat. A young woman with earbuds was in the window seat. A heavy-set man with an aisle preference sat in 37C already with elbows flared. Neither moved. "Excuse me?" Reuben said quietly. The woman shifted with polite surprise. "Oh, of course. Sorry." She rose. The man didn't move until Reuben made it to the aisle, and even then he only grudgingly pulled in his arm. The ceremonial sash scraped his coat as he slid into the cramped seat, adjusting his frame with quiet effort. The overhead bins had no space. A flight attendant, mid-30s, clearly flustered, rushed to assist. "Sir, I'm sorry about this. We had a note from the front desk, but I didn't realize—" "It's all right," Reuben said calmly. "Just help me secure the case. The bearskin cap can rest across my lap." She nodded, her voice lowering. "They shouldn't have done this. We didn't approve any seating changes from our end." "I've been through worse," he said with a small smile. "A desert with 30 kilos of gear. No AC. This will do fine." Her eyes lingered on the Victoria Cross, pinned to his chest. She looked like she wanted to say something, but professionalism won out. She nodded once and disappeared down the aisle. From across the row, a whisper. "Is that real?" Another. "Looks like a soldier or something." Passengers in surrounding rows turned subtly in their seats. Not everyone recognized the medal, but enough did. A few gazes were respectful, others curious, but the atmosphere had changed. Not tense, just heavy, like the air in a cathedral when someone kneels in silence. In row 38, an older man, white-haired, wearing a dark green tweed jacket, leaned forward slightly. "Excuse me, Sergeant," he said, voice low and deliberate. "That VC... Afghanistan?" "Yes, sir." The man nodded. "Royal Welch Fusiliers myself, Korea 52. I recognize the ribbon anywhere." Reuben offered a small incline of the head. "It's an honor." "No, son," the old soldier said, eyes shining just a little. "That honor's all yours." He raised a shaky hand in salute, 2 fingers against the brow, palm out, not sharp, but full of reverence. Reuben returned it subtly with a quiet, "Sir." The man leaned back, eyes closed now. The corners of his mouth turned upward. A few people who saw the exchange lowered their eyes. Whatever theater they thought the uniform represented had begun to look more like a monument. The last few passengers filtered in. Then came the sound of brisk steps, a woman in heels briskly clicking past the rows. Elaine Marks. She wasn't supposed to be on the flight. She must have pulled a supervisor's travel credential either for inspection or oversight. She walked the aisle briskly, scanning the seats, clipboard in hand. She spotted Reuben. Didn't smile. Just muttered under her breath. "Still playing dress-up, I see. All for show." And kept walking. Reuben didn't respond. Didn't need to. Not while the old man behind him watched with narrowed eyes. Not while the cabin absorbed the quiet contrast between the two. Some uniforms carry authority, others carry memory, and Reuben Shaw knew which one he wore. The boarding door had nearly closed when the sound of polished leather echoed down the jet bridge. Sharp, deliberate, unrushed. A final passenger stepped onto the aircraft. He was tall, composed, and wore a charcoal gray suit that fit with surgical precision. The navy tie beneath it bore the faint insignia of the Order of the Garter. No one noticed the detail at first, but the way the cabin crew straightened at the sight of him suggested this wasn't just another businessman late for his flight. The man gave a brief nod to the senior steward, who immediately pressed the intercom and whispered something that made the co-pilot rise from his seat and disappear behind the cockpit door. Row by row, as the man moved forward, conversations halted, phones were lowered, and though no announcement was made, a hush swept across the cabin like a held breath. By the time he reached row 37, the tension was so quiet it felt like snowfall. He stopped right beside Reuben and said nothing. Reuben turned slowly. Their eyes met only for a moment. The man in the suit didn't smile. He didn't frown. He simply nodded once, almost imperceptibly, and glanced down at the metal. Then, before anyone else could react, Reuben rose to his feet with a grace that seemed impossible in such a narrow space. His back straightened. He brought his heels together and, without a word, delivered a crisp, precise salute. A few passengers near them froze. One child whispered to her mother, "Mommy, is that who I think it is?" The man in the suit returned the salute just as quietly, just as measured. His expression didn't shift, but for anyone paying attention, something unspoken had passed between them. The attendant from earlier reappeared at a near jog. Her eyes flicked between the two men, and she looked instantly pale. "Sir," she began, but the man gently raised a hand. "It's all right," he said softly. "He was seated here?" "Yes, sir. He was assigned to, economy. We weren't made aware of the change until—" "No further explanation is needed," the man said. "Please alert the captain. I'll be remaining on board. There's been a slight adjustment." "Yes, Your Majesty," she whispered quickly and hurried away. Now the realization rippled visibly. One passenger audibly gasped. A man, 2 rows forward, sat bolt upright, hand tightening on his phone. Another woman turned to her partner and mouthed, "King Charles." The entire rear half of the aircraft seemed to shrink in on itself, like everyone was trying to vanish into their seats at once. Reuben remained still. King Charles turned slightly and gestured toward the front of the aircraft. "Sergeant Shaw, if you would, I believe they'll be making space in row 1. Reuben opened his mouth just barely, but the king cut in gently. "You've said enough already, and far better than most." Reuben nodded. No thanks. No apology. Just the smallest nod of acknowledgement before he carefully retrieved his bearskin cap and travel case from the overhead. No one said a word as he moved up the aisle beside the king. Not even Elaine, still standing near the front galley, suddenly staring at her shoes. They disappeared through the curtain without ceremony. Only silence followed. Because when royalty moves for a guardsman, it's not theater. It's history answering back. Row 1A had been held empty. It wasn't protocol. It wasn't planned. It was instinct. The steward from earlier had cleared it the moment she heard the voice, low and unmistakable, identify itself with the weight of 1,000 state addresses behind it. King Charles didn't need an entourage to command presence. He simply stepped into a space, and the space adjusted. As Reuben took his seat, placing his travel bag neatly beneath the window and setting his bearskin cap beside it, the king settled into 1B with the quiet ease of a man who had long since stopped being surprised by the gaps between public perception and private truth. There was no audience here, No ceremony, just two men in uniform, one still wearing his, the other now bound to a different kind of duty. Reuben shifted slightly, uncomfortable in the fine leather seat, unused to the luxury. Not quite the same as the barracks, I imagine, Charles said gently. No, sir, Reuben replied, eyes still forward, a bit softer on the back. The king gave a dry chuckle. That's the goal, I believe. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. The curtain had been drawn behind them, shielding the rest of the cabin from view, but the murmurs on the other side made it clear that word had traveled fast. You kept your bearing well, Charles said finally. Even with that woman. She's just doing what she thinks is policy, Reuben replied, his voice neutral. Some people see medals and think of theater. They don't know what's stitched behind them. Charles turned slightly toward him. That's the Victoria. Cross on your chest, isn't it? Yes, sir. The king paused. Afghanistan? Reuben nodded once. Charles didn't ask more. Didn't press. Not many alive carry that anymore, he said softly. It doesn't feel like something I carry, Reuben said. More like something I stand under. He glanced out the window for a beat, then added, It wasn't for anything heroic. I just didn't have the option of stepping back. The men next to me didn't either. Charles's eyes lingered on him. It's never for heroism, he said. That's what people misunderstand. It's for choosing to stand still when others would have moved. Loyalty to the man beside you, to the silence. That's what it really honors. Reuben gave the faintest nod. Feels heavier in civilian places, like it doesn't belong. It's not that it doesn't belong, Charles said quietly. It's that most people don't know what to do when dignity walks in the room, without asking permission. Reuben didn't reply. Charles went on, his voice even. The uniform still means something, even when others forget. Especially then. They sat in another stretch of silence, broken only by the soft mechanical hum of the aircraft, preparing to taxi. Then Charles turned toward him again. You know, I read somewhere recently that silence has its own kind of gravity. I believe that's true. Reuben didn't look at him, but his jaw tightened slightly. I've always thought, the king added, that soldiers like you remind the country what quiet loyalty looks like. Not with speeches, not with medals, just by being there when others walk away. Reuben exhaled, not heavy, just steady. Not everyone sees it that way, he murmured. Charles offered the faintest smile. They don't need to. There was nothing else said for a while, just the two of them sitting side by side, one with a crown on his passport, the other with a cross on his chest. Outside, the engines rumbled to life. The aircraft began to move, and behind the curtain, not a single voice rose above a whisper. Because when a king travels in silence beside his guard, even the air remembers to stay still. The seatbelt sign had pinged overhead. The cabin lights dimmed to their in-flight setting, casting a soft glow across the polished contours of row 1. A tray of tea had been offered, accepted politely by both men, and left mostly untouched. Neither seemed particularly interested in small comforts. King Charles folded his hands gently in his lap, watching the clouds peel away outside the window. You know, he said after a pause, there's something about long flights that forces reflection. You can't go anywhere, so your thoughts do. Reuben glanced over. That's true, sir. Same thing happens on long watches, especially at night. Watches overseas, We used to rotate 4-hour watches in Helmand. Once everything went quiet, it was just you, your breath, and 100 shadows, enough to make you remember things or forget the wrong ones. Charles nodded thoughtfully. And you carried that into the guard. Reuben looked forward. It's all the same posture, sir. Stillness, eyes forward. You're not there to talk, but you are there to be seen. That's the point. Reuben agreed quietly. Not for glory, for presence. The king sipped his tea. Tell me, if it's not an imposition about the medal. Reuben didn't respond immediately. When he did, it was calm, controlled. Convoy hit an IED. Dust, fire, noise, all blurred. One of our trucks flipped. Gunner was trapped underneath. Couldn't move. He took a breath. I crawled in. We were taking small arms fire from a ridge. No cover, just smoke and screaming. I dragged him out. Lost a bit of my hearing that day. Couple others didn't make it. I didn't do anything extraordinary. I just moved when I should have stayed still. Charles listened motionless. Reuben continued. They gave me this cross, but it's not mine. I wear it because 4 of them can't. The words weren't bitter. They were etched in stone. Charles leaned slightly forward. You think people don't understand what it means? Reuben looked down at the medal, then back out the window. I think it doesn't fit in airports. There was a silence between them, not uncomfortable, but dense. Then Charles said, You know, my father once told me something about medals. He said, they're not symbols of bravery. They're receipts for pain that was paid on credit. Reuben blinked once. Smart man. Charles allowed a faint smile. He was. He also said, Sometimes people will think you're proud of a medal. You're not. You're honoring the weight of it. Reuben nodded. That's exactly it. The king shifted in his seat. You know, Sergeant, in all my years I've met more men with medals than I can count. But only a few understood the burden of being seen and won. Fewer still had the dignity to wear it with silence. Reuben didn't answer. He didn't need to. Charles said, That woman back there, Elaine, she saw a prop, a costume. What she missed was that you weren't wearing the medal to be noticed. You wore it so those who died could be remembered. Reuben's jaw tightened slightly. Sometimes people think I'm just being dramatic, that I wear this for attention. And yet, Charles said gently, when the attention came, you said nothing. The guard gave the faintest shrug. Words are expensive, sir. Silence buys more. Charles smiled. You remind people what loyalty looks like, Sergeant Shaw, without ever opening your mouth. Reuben looked over. Not everyone sees it that way. Charles looked back, quiet and still. They don't need to. And with that, they both leaned back. 2 men from vastly different lives bound by the same weight, the burden of memory, of service, and of knowing exactly what it costs to stand still when the world wants you to move. 3 days later, the rain returned to Heathrow like it always did, without apology, without drama. The terminal hummed with its usual rhythm. Shoes on tile, bags rolling, boarding announcements echoing through the vaulted glass. But behind the scenes, things weren't quite so usual. In a private HR suite on the 3rd floor, Elaine Marks sat across from a senior administrator and a suited man from corporate affairs. Her posture was defensive, jaw tight, eyes flicking between faces. You're not in trouble, the woman had started, but we've received a formal internal complaint. Elaine's fingers tapped the arm of her chair. From who? We're not at liberty to say, the suited man replied, voice flat. but it originated from someone with royal clearance. Elaine's lips parted slightly. Royal clearance? The HR officer didn't blink. We've reviewed CCTV footage, passenger manifests, and several staff witness statements. There was a tone to your interaction with one Color Sergeant Reuben Shaw that we'd like to better understand. Elaine's brows lifted. I followed protocol. Protocol doesn't require mocking a Victoria Cross, the corporate rep said, sharply. Elaine's face flushed. I didn't mock it. You told staff he probably bought it off eBay. You questioned his attire despite having confirmed documentation. You personally downgraded his seat. I thought it was fake. You didn't check. The silence that followed said everything. Meanwhile, down in arrivals, Reuben Shaw walked quietly along the concourse, his ceremonial bag over one shoulder and a wool coat draped neatly across his arm. No uniform today, no medal, just a man in pressed civilian clothes moving through the terminal like any other traveler. A woman near the escalator did a double take. Are you... He gave a polite nod, not stopping. She didn't push, just smiled. Well, thank you for whatever it is you've done. Reuben kept walking. There was no announcement, no briefing, no press release, just a quiet correction handled behind doors. A week later, the airline's internal staff newsletter went out as usual. Page 6 featured a short paragraph under Policy, Updates. Effective immediately, staff are reminded to treat all service uniforms with full professional courtesy. For clarity, official military decorations, including the Victoria Cross, are to be acknowledged as such unless otherwise proven. Questions about uniformed personnel should be directed to the duty manager. A reference guide will be available at all desks. The sentence sat there quietly. No explanation, no names, no mentions of royalty or reviews. But those who'd been there, they understood. Reuben never replied to the letter of apology that arrived by mail 2 days later, delivered in an unmarked envelope with an embossed return address. He didn't need to. He folded it neatly and tucked it inside the big cover of a worn black notebook. Then he placed that notebook in the small wooden drawer in his kitchen beside an envelope marked simply Parade Schedule and an old photograph from Kandahar. 4 young men, all squinting into a sun that no longer existed. Some medals are for ceremony, some are for silence, and some are worn by men who don't ask for acknowledgement because they carry what matters in memory, not metal. Have you ever witnessed someone stand their ground, not with noise, but with silence? Do you think uniforms and medals should automatically command respect, or should it be earned in each moment? And if you were standing behind Sergeant Shaw at that check-in counter, would you have spoken up? Let us know in the comments. We read every single one. And if this story made you pause or gave you a different kind of respect for quiet strength, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you never miss our daily uploads. Know someone who thinks Royal Guards are just pageantry? Share this video with them. Let them see what quiet dignity really looks like. Our other Royal Guard stories are appearing on your screen right now. Watch those next, and we'll see you tomorrow, same time, with another brand new story that proves sometimes silence.